Welcome to Dawn of the New Earth. My name is Morgue, and I am an ex-Christian revealing hidden knowledge to help transform consciousness and create a new world. And today we're answering the question, what happens when you join a secret society? Now, the last couple of streams, we have been talking about the Golden Dawn, and we gave a basic introduction and considered its history, as well as a very general overview of what it's about. But today we're going to be taking a look at what would actually happen when you joined this secret society. And this is one of the most influential secret societies in the Western occult tradition, and it is absolutely massive. So let me tell you that we are going to attempt to do this, but I have to, give a sort of a warning here that there is a mountain of information, and that takes years and years and years of study to really understand. And so I'm going to do my best to put it as succinctly as possible. But just to give you an idea, I'll show you some of the books that we are going to be reading some excerpts from, and you can see they're absolutely massive. The first is Israel Regardie's The Golden Dawn. Some of the information that we're going to be discussing comes from this, as well as another book known as Self-Initiation into the Golden Dawn Tradition. And so, by the way, if you are interested in either of these books, I have put a link to where you can get them in the description of this video. So let me put these aside. And on that note, we are going to get started. But before we do, make sure you like and subscribe. And if you enjoy my work, consider becoming a member because it helps out a lot. It helps spread this information. And if you hit the join button below this video, you can see all the different perks you can get access to, like our members only videos. There's a ton of them, our Discord server, etc. Check it out. I want to remind you that my book series is out. You can check out the first one, Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. This is book number 1. The link is in the description of this video. And you can also find the audiobook version of this as well, narrated by me. Additionally, you will find a link to my Spotify channel in the description as well. So there's a lot of stuff in the description. Check it out. All right, my friends, we are going to get started. Now, I want to put a disclaimer out here is that the reason why that we're talking about this sort of thing in general is because I want to let you guys know that this is information that you can use to transform your life. And you don't need to join some sort of secret society or organization to be able to understand this information. And that's actually what the authors of one of the books, the Golden Dawn Tradition, Self-Initiation book I talked about, written by Sheik and Tabitha Cicero, they very much say that you can do this sort of thing on your own. You don't have to join a specific order or whatnot. And I just want to put that warning out there because secret societies can be very dangerous, and magic can be very dangerous. Okay, so I want to put that disclaimer and out there because I want to say I'm not critiquing any specific society. I'm sure that there are some societies out there that are great and have fantastic members and are healthy. But there are some that are very dangerous. And in my opinion, using secrecy creates an atmosphere that is just ready for manipulation and coercion and sometimes abuse. So we have to be very, very careful. I just want to put that out there. Talking about this stuff, I'm doing it to show how you can use it in your life without having to join these things, not to get you interested in joining these things. Because like I said, they can be dangerous. And magic itself in general can be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. And the reason why is because you have to be very rationally and logically grounded. Some people might even wonder, why are you talking about magic? That's crazy. And we explained this a little bit in the last video, is that if you understand the underlying mechanisms behind it, it's actually very logical and rational. It seems crazy, because a lot of people misunderstand what it is and take it literally instead of symbolically and metaphorically. But the Western occult tradition and the different magical techniques are actually used often in psychology, particularly Jungian psychology, in processes like individuation and active imagination and working with unconscious archetypes, just to name a few. So we're going to get right into it. Like I said, I showed you some of the books. This is a massive amount of information. So we're going to get started. And we're just going to start wading our way through. And if some of this sounds confusing, I guarantee you that it will, because it's stuff that we're not normally used to thinking about in the everyday world. But don't worry, we're going to explain it. We're going to take it one step at a time and start to tease out the information and see what all of this is about. So what happens when you join a secret society? Well, specifically, we're going to be talking about the Golden Dawn. All secret societies are different, of course, but we're going to be taking a look at specifically what would happen if you joined a secret society, if you joined the Golden Dawn. And the Golden Dawn is a magical order that teaches secrets of magic. Magic is about transformation. Magic is about transformation of the self, or transformation of the world and reality. And what we have to understand here is that when one joins one of these particular societies, let's really focus on the Golden Dawn here, is the first thing is initiation. And we talked about this a little bit in the last video. If you haven't seen the playlist on this, I highly recommend it. I usually say, you don't have to have seen the other ones to understand this video. You don't really, but it would definitely help with this kind of stuff. So just to recap a little bit, last time we talked about what the Golden Dawn represents. The Golden Dawn represents the emergence of divine light. I'm looking at some of my notes here to recall what we talked about last time. And it's symbolically about breaking through darkness as a symbol of humanity's spiritual evolution. And there are magic is used. And there are different types of magic. There's high magic and low magic. The Golden Dawn focuses on high magic, which is about transformation of the self and connecting to divinity. And magic typically involves working with archetypes, which are structures of the unconscious mind, and working with and aligning with universal forces. So if you were to join the Golden Dawn, first of all, the Golden Dawn is divided into different grades. Not only is it divided into different grades, which are different levels, it's divided into 3 orders, actually. There's the outer order, or the first order, the inner order, or the second order, and then the third order. Now, let me see if I will bring up on screen here something known as the Tree of Life. This is the Tree of Life. It's a symbol used in Jewish mysticism known as Kabbalah, and it is at the heart of many Western esoteric traditions. And this is related, why am I bringing this up? Because this is related to the system of levels in the Golden Dawn and how the Golden Dawn is structured. So the Golden Dawn is structured based on the Tree of Life. So what is the Tree of Life? To say it succinctly, the Tree of Life is essentially a blueprint. It's a structure. It's a blueprint. It's a blueprint that outlines the mind of God, your mind, and the structure of the universe, because ultimately these are all the same thing. So it is a blueprint that lays out the structure of the mind of God, your mind, and the structure of the universe, because they are all one and the same. And remember, in the Western occult tradition, God is not seen as like a creator God like in the Bible, but rather that we are emanations from that God. So essentially that we are God at heart, just locked away. Most of us haven't realized it yet. Anyway, this is a blueprint for that structure. One of the things that one learns in the Golden Dawn is how to work with this structure, which I will, if we have time, I'll begin to explain that. But the reason why I'm just bringing it up right now is because we're talking about how the Golden Dawn was structured, because the whole idea is like, well, what happens when you join a secret society, specifically the Golden Dawn? Well, first you start off at a certain level. Okay, so let's see if I can show you here. It's probably too small on the screen for you to see. I'll try and make it a little bigger. So we can see the Tree of Life has been divided into 3 sections. And this is divided into 3 orders. And so you have the first order, or outer order. And then you have the second order, or inner order. And then you have the third order. So we're going to be focusing on the first or outer order today. Later, we may focus on, we may focus on the second or inner order. And then the third order is a topic that we may discuss if that's something that you guys want to talk about. So just to be general about it, the outer order is about balance and preparation. The second or inner order is about going beyond human. And then the third order is where the Golden Dawn, the founding members, particularly Mathers, claimed was the realm of those who were no longer human. They called them the secret chiefs, and these were apparently ascended masters that communicated with the founding members on how to structure the order and give lessons. Now, that's very likely not true, but there's more to it than that. We won't have time to talk about the secret chiefs and all that supernatural stuff related to spirit communication and whatnot in this video. But if that's something you guys want to see, I'll absolutely do a video on that because it's very important. But this kind of goes, case in point as to why I say be very careful about secret societies and stuff, because you can see already where there's a certain level of manipulation going on here. Even we've barely even started talking about this, but you can even see it with this, where you have the founding member, one of the founding members, Mathers, going, oh, I have this secret, special connection with these secret beings that are telling me how we should do things. So let's do it this way because this is where what the secret beings are saying. And see, you gotta be very, very careful with this sort of stuff. But anyway, the outer order is related to the first four Sephiroth on the Tree of Life. And so we're going to be taking a look at Malkuth, Yesod, Hod, and Netzach. So if you were to join, if you were to join, you would first start out as a neophyte. Neophyte means newly planted. So neophyte is, let me bring up my notes here. So I'm going to read some quotes from the book I showed in the beginning, particularly Self-Initiation into the Golden Dawn by Sheik and Tabitha Cicero. And so the neophyte is kind of like, it's where you begin, but it's not even considered a true grade that corresponds to anything on the Tree of Life. So so when I show the Tree of Life here, neophyte's not even on here. Neophyte is where you start. Neophyte is where you begin. And if you want to become a neophyte, you have to go through the neophyte initiation ceremony. So you go through an initiation ceremony. And this initiation ceremony, we talked a little bit about initiation before in the last stream, but just to remind you what initiation is, Sheik and Tabitha Cicero says, as indicated earlier, there are two forms of initiation, astral and physical. The first type occurs on the subtle planes of the astral and is not always perceived by the initiate until after the fact. This type of initiation is conferred upon a person directly for spiritual archetypes within the psyche. And the physical initiation reaffirms the candidate's spiritual intent and will by the act of submitting him or herself to the process of initiation. It's a physical proclamation to the manifest universe of one's desires to follow the path of initiate of the mysteries. So anyways, the initiation is twofold. One is astral and one is physical. The physical is you're declaring your intention and desire to follow through in committing yourself to the order. Now, what about the astral initiation? We talked about this a little bit last time. Like I said, if you want more info on that, the astral initiation is basically happens on the psychological level. Whenever you hear the word astral, think of psychological. It's the plane of the psyche, the plane of the mind. And so it means that it affects a change in one's mind. And so if you're going to join, you're going to become a neophyte, you're going to go through this initiation ceremony. And the initiation ceremony is extremely elaborate. And there's an initiation ceremony for every single grade. So in the outer order, right, you start off as a neophyte, then you become a zealotor, theoricus, practicus, and philosophus. Those are the grades of the outer order. And there is a initiation ceremony for every single grade. Every single grade, there's a new initiation ceremony. And like I said, they are extremely elaborate. Now, what's interesting about this is that, and another reason why you have to be careful with this stuff, in my opinion, is when you're going through an initiation ceremony and going through. So what's the point of all this? The point is, what magic is in general is about communicating with your unconscious mind. I gave the example of the 4 elements in the last video. When you're working with the 4 elements, earth, air, water, and fire, when you're learning to control the elements, it's not literally about learning to control the physical world. It's about realizing that these elements represent archetypal patterns, where air, for example, represents intellect. Water can represent emotions and the unconscious. Fire can represent willpower. And earth can represent groundedness and stability. And so when you're working with these archetypal symbols, you're basically communicating with your unconscious, because your unconscious mind does not communicate in words and language. It communicates in symbols. So if you are doing certain rituals, which if we have time, we'll talk about today. If you are doing certain rituals that involve, let's say, balancing the elements, this doesn't have anything to do with manipulating the physical reality or changing the physical world. What you're doing is you're learning a language to communicate with your unconscious mind. So you can almost think of, this is a language to communicate with your unconscious mind. So when you learn these symbols, what you're essentially doing is kind of like learning words. And rituals or ceremonies are like sentences. And so obviously if you have just words if you just learn the symbols by themselves, it's not going to do much, right? Like if you just learn words, you're not really going to receive very much information. If you're going to open up a book and there's just a bunch of random words in there, it's not going to tell you much. But when those words are ordered into a certain pattern, what happens? You receive information. So when you learn these symbols, you're learning words that the unconscious can understand. When you perform rituals and ceremonies, it's like putting together sentences and commands that your unconscious can understand. So when you are, for example, learning to arrange or balance the 4 elements, this is telling your psyche to balance your intellect, your unconscious, your willpower, and your groundedness. And so it affects a change on the psychic level. And when I say psychic, I just mean of the psyche, not psychic just means of the psyche. It doesn't mean, reading people's minds or anything like that, bending spoons, nothing like that. It just means of the psyche. So it affects a change on a psychic level when you work with archetypes and you work with ceremonies and you work with rituals. And so, another thing you got to be careful about is when you are doing these ceremonies, it is heavily filled with symbolism, like the initiation ceremonies, I'm saying. It's heavily filled with symbolism and heavily filled with like oaths and declarations. And you got to be careful because you don't always know what these initiations mean until later. So for example, a neophyte might go through the initiation ceremony and not really know what it is that these certain actions, these certain movements, these certain symbols mean until later. So particularly, it's in something called the Z documents. When certain members reach a certain level, they're given the Z documents, and the Z documents explain what the ceremonies actually represent, what they correspond to. And so, like I said, you always want, in my opinion, if you are going to be doing something that can affect your psyche, or you're doing something where you're taking an oath, you better sure as hell know what it is that you're getting into and what you're allowing to be implanted there in your psyche. So that's why I always want to stress, be very careful with this stuff. And what I like about this particular book is that, like, look at this quote. I think it's a great one. Where was this quote? Yeah. So any individual or group that claims sole ownership of the Hermetic tradition or claims to be the official grand high muckety muck of the world is doing occult students a great disservice by blowing off a good deal of hot air. The same is true for anyone who claims to know magical secrets that can only be bought for a high price. So I like that in this book, they often point out how there's bullshitters out there and to be very careful. They say questions of legitimacy of heredity of a magical group can in fact get in the way of spiritual progress. If a student becomes more interested in buying or otherwise obtaining a magical merit badge from a recognized group, rather than securing union with one's holy guardian angel. What is the holy guardian angel? The holy guardian angel is your higher self. So achieving union with the holy guardian angel means establishing a direct connection to your higher self. And so basically what they're saying is that, you know, be careful, because if you get into a society because you want a special, you want a special pin or you want a special grade name, that can get in the way of progress. Another reason why you have to be careful with this sort of stuff. They say it reads, empty gestures and hollow proclamations of high degrees and titles means little or nothing to one's own higher self. The intent and determination to achieve union with the divine is the only important consideration in advancing to the path of an initiate. And to do this, one need not be a member of any recognized magical group. And I'll say that again because it's so important. The intent and determination to achieve union with the divine is the only important consideration in advancing to the path of an initiate. And to do this, one need not be a member of any recognized magical group. One reason why I like this book quite a bit. So now that we know a little bit about like what initiation is, and we went over a little more about what magic is, how it affects the psyche, and how an initiation ceremony can begin to work on structuring the psyche. Let's talk a little bit about the various degrees. Okay. So like I said, when you start off, you join as a neophyte. And as a neophyte, you are learning the very basics of the theory of magic. So when you begin as a neophyte, you start learning various disciplines. And what you're essentially doing is learning the language that you are that's going to aid you in communicating with your unconscious mind. So as you join, neophyte is the starting point. It's an introduction to the system. Then once you graduate from neophyte, you become a zelator, which of course has its own initiation. And this is associated with the element of earth. Remember when we talked about the 4 elements? Well, each grade of the outer order represents one of the elements. So zelator is associated with the element of earth. And this is focused on grounding and stability. And you're going to learn all of the symbolism associated with the earth element. Names of gods, beings, symbolism, all associated with earth. The next degree is Theoricus, which is the element of air, which has to do with the intellect. Again, you're going to learn about all the deities, the angels, and the symbolism related to the intellect, or air rather. And then there is Practicus, which is associated with water, which is the unconscious, intuition, emotional control. Once again, you'll learn all the symbolism related to that. And then Philosophus, which represents fire, which is about willpower and transformation, which is extremely important. And this is going to allow one to be prepared. All of this basically is preparation for the inner order. All outer order practices are preparation for the inner order. And so, like I said, while you're in the outer order, you're very much focused on understanding the four elements, as well as learning the different symbolic languages to communicate with the psyche. So, and then you learn some rituals, of course, as well. And we'll talk about that. So one of these, so as an example, what's some of the symbolism and archetypal languages that you learn? Well, the theory of alchemy, which includes the four elements. So you learn about the theory of alchemy, which is a system where you learn, again, the four elements, the planets, and their correspondences to different metals. And the reason why you learn this, once again, is not because it's literally about metal, but it's about learning to, because alchemy is all symbolic for, what's it symbolic for? Well, in alchemy, you're taking metal from its very basic state, lead, and purifying it until it gets higher and higher and higher, more purified metals until it finally becomes gold. And so you are learning this process in a symbolic form, which is about transformation, which is going to be helpful later in communicating with your psyche and your unconscious. And once again, for anyone thinking, oh, this stuff is crazy, remember Carl Jung, highly intelligent psychologist, was obsessed with alchemy. He wrote 3 books on alchemy. And the reason why is basically, so the alchemists originally were, most people understand it as the precursor to chemistry, and it is the precursor to chemistry. But what people don't really realize is that what the alchemists were doing, they were trying to change metal into gold, but they believed that their own being and consciousness affected the process. So in addition to using methods to try and purify the metals, they also developed methods to purify the self, the soul, the mind, the psyche. So it was a twofold process, purifying of the self while they tried to purify the metals. And so Carl Jung saw this and realized this is an extremely powerful archetypal symbolism for transforming the inner self. And they were doing a lot of work with active imagination as well, where they would even, like communicate with the metals, but it was a form of active, again, nothing crazy. This is known as active imagination. It's used in Jungian psychology, where it basically has to do with imagining a certain scenario. And it's I don't know if we have enough time to talk about active imagination right now, but in a nutshell, it's like daydreaming, but so active imagination, I'm trying to think of a quick way to explain it. Active imagination is like daydreaming, except you're letting your unconscious take control. So, for example, in a daydream, let's say you imagine yourself like, oh, I'm going to imagine myself going to, I don't know, Disneyland or something. I don't know. You imagine something, whatever you want to daydream about. Or, but an active, and so you go inside your mind and you specifically conjure up this imagery and this experience in your mind. Active imagination is similar in that you're awake and you're conjuring up imagery, but you're letting whatever comes to mind come to mind. So you just sort of sit there until you find yourself in a certain place, and perhaps there's a being of some kind, and then you can go up to that being and talk to it and have a conversation with it. And again, it's nothing crazy. It's just seeing what your unconscious is bringing up. It's like when you dream. When you go to sleep and dream, Obviously, there's nothing wild about that. I mean, it's amazing. It should be wild, but you know what I mean? It's not crazy. A dream is a projection of your unconscious mind. A dream is a world built from your unconscious. And so if you're in a dream world and you talk to a dream character in your dream, you're talking to a part of yourself, an unconscious part of yourself. And you can learn about yourself by talking to dream characters or examining the dream content. This is dream analysis. Active imagination is very similar, except you're awake. But you close your eyes and you allow you allow your mind to generate a scene, etc. This is easier for some people than others. But part of magic is about learning how to cultivate these abilities. So you learn all these different sets of symbolism. Alchemy is one. Kabbalah is another, which we talked about. Kabbalah entails the tree of life, which is that blueprint, which is an archetypal system that one imprints on themselves. In other words, just like understands it and commits it to memory so that you can easily access archetypal symbolism whenever you want. And also astrology and tarot. Remember, this doesn't necessarily mean that these things are objectively true. They are just systems of symbolism. They're just archetypes. Saying that you're learning astrological symbolism doesn't necessarily mean that you think that the planets literally have an effect on you. Just like you don't think when you do alchemy, you're literally turning metal into gold. It is symbolism for something else. Same thing with astrology. Now, of course, there are some people who take it to be literally true, and a lot of people in the occult actually take it to be literally true. But it does, in my opinion, this misses the point. And I have guess what, Jungian interpretation of astrology, because Jung was interested in alchemy. Jung was also interested in astrology. And when Jung saw that alchemy wasn't really about turning metal into gold, it was about purifying the soul, Jung saw that astrology wasn't literally about the causal effects of planets on human beings, but rather it was a system of archetypal symbolism that mapped out or referenced forces in the unconscious mind. So you learn alchemy, you learn Kabbalah, you learn astrology, you learn tarot, you learn to work with archangels and angels in general. And so what's all this about, working with archangels, things like this? Well, so you have the different archangels, and the different archangels can represent forces of the mind. And so all of these systems correspond, by the way. So to get a better understanding of this, let's talk a little bit about what one of the rituals used in the Golden Dawn is. This is known as, and by the way, if this is a lot of info, I know this is kind of a lot of information at once. And what I would like you guys to do is tell me in the comments what sort of things you're interested in, because any one of these things could be an entire video. We could do an entire video about alchemy. We could do an entire video about Kabbalah. We could do an entire video about archangels. We could do an entire video about the tree of life. Anyway, tell me if there's any aspect you want to know more about, or if anything is confusing, because I often don't know, because I, have studied this stuff for a long time. I kind of have lost the ability to know what is obvious and what is more like, oh, this needs more explanation. So always tell me what you guys want to know about, what more you want to learn about, etc. Because this is a massive amount of information. So all these symbolic systems, they are tied together. And one thing that I want to mention is that when we're talking about archetypal symbolism, it's a very subjective science. And what I mean by that is it's not like doing mathematics. When you're doing mathematics, you're studying the formal structure of reality, and certain things are either right or wrong. Like 2 + 2 = 4. That's right. 2 + 2 = 6. That's wrong. When it comes to these systems of symbolism, certain people might have a completely different interpretation of one symbol for another. One person might see a certain, let's say, angel as being actually like an evil demon, and another might see it as being a being of light and about protection or something. So which one is right? Doesn't matter. There is not one that is right or not. It's about learning what resonates with you, because you're trying to communicate with your unconscious. You're not trying to create an objective mapping out of what certain things are supposed to mean. They're symbols that allow you to connect with your unconscious. So, like, for example, I'll give the example of fire. In the Western occult tradition, fire is usually associated with willpower. However, some Jungian interpretations associate fire with intuition. Which one is right? It doesn't matter. It's what works for you. Fire doesn't objectively represent one thing or the other. It's a symbol that's about connecting with your unconscious. Now, there are some archetypal symbols, of course, that have correspondences that a lot of us can resonate with because they're within the collective unconscious. But ultimately, these are like jumping off points for unlocking your own intuition. So for me personally, I think fire being associated with the will and the direction of energy makes more sense to me than associating it with intuition. I think associating intuition with water, to me, that makes more sense. And that's more typical in the Western occult tradition. But that's not how some Jungians interpret it. But that's a topic for another video. But I just want to point that out. Some people might be confused about, like, what if I see different interpretations? Which one is the right one? It's not really about which one the right one is. It's about what speaks to you and what kickstarts your intuition, because you're learning a language to communicate with your higher self, with your unconscious mind, with your true self. That's what you're trying to do through all this. You're establishing a link between your conscious self and your unconscious self. And so, for example, all right, I'll give you another example. You learn, let's say, to work with the magical weapons. What are magical weapons? Well, the magical weapons are things like a dagger, a wand, a cup, a pentacle. These are the magical weapons. And so these magical weapons have correspondences with the elements. The dagger is associated with air, which we know means intellect. The wand is associated with fire, which we know is about willpower or directing energy. The cup is associated with water, which we know is associated with intuition and emotions. And then the pentacle is associated with the earth, which is associated with groundedness and stability. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because if you have these items, like you literally have these physical items, you literally have a dagger, you literally have a wand, you literally have a pentacle, you literally have a cup, and you're doing a ritual or a ceremony with them, and you're arranging them in a certain order, and you're arranging them in a certain pattern and doing certain things with them. This can seem sort of silly, but what you're doing is you have projected your basically like unconscious psyche into consciousness. I'm getting away from my microphone. I want to make sure you can actually hear me. So this is important. What you're doing is you are projecting your unconscious into consciousness, into the physical world. Not in like some woo-woo kind of way, but these are symbols of the unconscious that are now physical right in front of you. And so by doing certain things with them, by arranging them, by balancing them physically and consciously, your unconscious is recognizing that and will begin to orient itself and structure itself as well, because you're communicating with it. You're by ordering it consciously and using the symbolic language, you are communicating with your unconscious to begin that work internally. And so you're establishing a link between consciousness and the unconscious, your higher self and your ego self or lower self. And again, this is very related to Jungian psychology. According to Carl Jung, the ego is a complex whose archetypal core is the higher self. And the ego is said to be the servant of the higher self, or the higher self in miniature, sort of. And so this is why you're learning these different things. So for example, this can all be combined together. So we'll talk about one of the most important rituals in the Golden Dawn, which is the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. I don't have time to explain all of it, but I'm going to give you a basic idea of what it entails because it's a good example of all this. In the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, you essentially use some kind of magical weapon. You don't have to, but you choose some, whether it's a dagger or a wand or whatever. You choose what it is. So you're beginning to you're choosing something that's going to represent directing energy. And essentially what you do is you begin to first you utter the names of God. And by uttering the names of God, you're basically taking on divinity yourself. You're associating yourself with God. You are taking on the role of God by uttering the various names of God. And again, you're communicating this to your unconscious, that you are God and you're recognizing your divinity. And within the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, you call upon the 4 archangels. You call upon Raphael, Gabriel, Michael, and Uriel. And each one of these archangels, guess what? They represent one of the 4 elements. Raphael represents air. Gabriel represents water. Michael represents fire. Uriel represents earth. And guess what? Each one of them is associated with one of the magical weapons. The dagger for Raphael and air, the wand with Michael and fire, chalice for water and Gabriel, and the pentacle for Uriel and earth. And so you're calling upon these archangels, you're doing this ritual, you're you're associating yourself with God, with the director, with the one in charge, the one who has power, and you are balancing and calling upon the 4 archangels, which represents the 4 elements, which of course represent aspects of the psyche: intellect, willpower, intuition, emotions, groundedness, and stability. And you are organizing them. You are telling your psyche to structure your mind in such a way where you can have all of these different faculties working in union. Archangels are archetypes. It's right there in the name. Archangels are archetypes. And you can learn even more. You start to learn about other angels as well. And there's all different types of magical systems, but there's something known as the 72 names of God, or the 72 angels. And so when you work with these angels, you can think of them as like different frequencies you tune into, because each of these 72 angels represent a certain aspect of the mind. So if you want to develop a certain aspect of your mind, or tune into or tap into a certain aspect of the mind by tuning into these different symbols, these different archetypes, you are sort of like tuning your unconscious to a specific frequency. You can think of like the archangels as broad frequencies. They're very broad. And the other many angels are more like fine tuning it, dialing it into something specific. Like maybe specifically communication, or writing power. If you want to write something, you're tuning into something that's very, very specific rather than something broad like just intellect in general. So though that's one of the rituals that one learns. You learn other rituals as well, such as the Kabbalistic cross. And the Kabbalistic cross is about connecting with the tree of life. The Kabbalistic cross is essentially visualizing yourself as the tree of life itself, so that you are aligning yourself with the cosmic framework. And this is, of course, associating yourself with divinity as usual. So I want to read some quotes here to get a better understanding of all this from the book, once again, Self-Initiation into the Golden Dawn Tradition. I've linked that in the comments if you want to take a look at it yourself. So remember, everything we're talking about right now is the first order, or the outer order. says the first or outer order is designed to convey to the student an understanding of the 4 elemental principles of nature. But more importantly, the student must learn to realize and balance these 4 elements as indispensable ingredients of his or her own psychological and spiritual makeup. And see, this is about the psyche, the structure. Nothing crazy. You're not trying to like literally change metal into gold or learn to control. It's about the psyche. And even it says here, we once read a criticism of the Golden Dawn, that the Golden Dawn, who claimed that the Golden Dawn taught its members to try and control the elements in the outer world rather than controlling the elements within. He couldn't be more wrong. Equilibrating the elemental components within is the primary goal of the outer grades, right? So the outer grades is all about the elements and balancing elements. The key objective of the first order could be summed up in the phrase, learn to balance. Now, there is a transition to the inner order. But before we talk about the transition to the inner order, I want to talk a little bit, a few quotes here that discuss what we've been talking about. So it says the goal of initiation is to bring about the illumination of the human soul by the inner and divine light. A true initiate is an individual whose higher self has merged with the lower personality and actually incarnated into the physical body. This is something I talk about in Inner Star Actualization, where you can look at the body as being sort of a portal or doorway for your inner star, your higher self. That's not in Golden, this is in the Neogenian system. And this is essentially what they're talking about here. The personality is left in charge of the day-to-day routines of living and working, but the higher self is free to look out at the world through the eyes of the initiate. Through this experience, the individual is given a permanent extension of consciousness, which is impossible to mistake. Very important to really grasp and understand what that means. This is another thing we talk about in the Neogenian system, the different levels of consciousness or triadic consciousness, where you have the avatar perspective, the Zadic perspective, and the absolute perspective. What's really being talked about here is the relationship between the Zadic or the avataric perspective and the Zadic perspective, which is the idea that you as an ego are in charge of daily life, daily routine things, but you have a permanent connection to your higher self, which is you. It's not something separate from you. It's the true you, actually. The ego is less you than, the ego is still part of you, but it's not the true you. The true you is your higher self. And so you are bringing it into the world. You're bringing it into consciousness by establishing this link to it. Before it is possible, I'm continuing to read, before it is possible for the higher self to manifest in consciousness, the lower personality must be tuned to the same wavelength as the inner self. This is what we were talking about before, by getting in connection to your higher self, by learning the symbols that resonate with you and that speak to you. The genius or higher self carries out its existence in the higher spiritual realms in the same manner that the lower personality carries out its functions in the secular world. What does that mean? We already talked about this a little bit, but this means that, right, your ego self is concerned with day-to-day activities. Oh, I have to get up and go to work and make food and have breakfast and write and watch TV or whatever. You're doing all these things. What are you doing? Well, you're ordering your life in consciousness. You're ordering your life in consciousness. What they're saying is that since you've carried out this connection, your higher self is doing the same thing in the spiritual realm, or what we know as the mental domain, the domain of the mind. So while your conscious personality is out there ordering your physical life, your higher self, now that you've established that link, is ordering your unconscious mental internal life. And by the way, the reason why this is important is because this is going to, remember, I've told you before that there's a difference between high magic and practical magic. High magic is unification with the divine, letting your inner higher self actualize, connecting to your higher self. Practical magic is like applying your will to have things that you want to occur in daily life. Like, oh, I want to raise at my job, or I want to meet someone, or whatever. Daily practical sort of things, or just practical life sort of things, making something happen. Well, the more that you've established a connection to your higher self, the more effective you will be in obtaining those goals. That's why it's important to understand high magic. And a lot of people don't give a shit about high magic. They all want practical magic, but they don't realize that without the high magic, the practical magic's not going to be very effective. Like I've said before, it's like a flashlight, and the high magic is like the battery of the flashlight. So, and with that, again, that's nothing crazy, but think about it. If you have your higher self and your unconscious working on organizing your different faculties, becoming more balanced, balancing your willpower with your intellect, with your intuition, with your groundedness, guess what? You're going to be a lot more effective at getting a raise at work, because you'll be able to apply your will. You'll be able to apply your intellect. You'll be able to apply your groundedness. You will be able to emotionally regulate yourself, because all of this has been developed through the organization of your psychic structures, psychic relating to psyche, of course. Now, one quick thing that I want to throw in there is that, in my opinion, to be very effective, you also have to do this sort of, you have to do conscious work. It's not just about like doing rituals and whatnot. And in my opinion, magic sometimes misses this element, in that it's so heavily focused on ceremony and ritual. It misses some of the actual theory that is required for doing this sort of work. But well, I want to stay on topic. We'll talk about that another time. But so what we've understood here is that it's about establishing a connection to your higher self. And so this is what, you join as a neophyte. You're part of this outer order. You're balancing your psyche. You're learning symbolism. You're learning rituals. Symbols are like the words. Rituals are like the sentences and the commands or communication. And you are using it to communicate with your higher self. In other words, projecting certain patterns that will be recognized by your unconscious, so that it begins to organize itself and structure itself in a particular way. And you're beginning to prepare for this connection with your higher self. Continuing to read here, it says, the seed that an initiation plants within the soul of the magician is a perpetual one that will remain intact throughout. Oh, this is important. A lot of people ask me this. A lot of people ask, in terms of the Neogenian system, because obviously we teach reincarnation, or what we prefer to use, relocalization. They go, what is the point of learning all this stuff if you just die and become reincarnated or relocalized and you forget it all? What's the point? Well, the point that I try to impart to people is that you're working on the transformation of your eternal self. So even though your ego self may not remember it, your higher self will, and it will be in the background. And an example I give is kind of like, most people can do basic math. I'm sure you can do basic math, but you probably don't remember every lesson you ever had on mathematics, right? You don't literally remember. I mean, some people have a great memory, but I think most of us don't remember every lesson we ever had in school. But even though you don't remember the lessons, you can still perform the operation because it's in your unconscious. So same idea here goes with relocalization, reincarnation, is that, yes, even though your ego self may not have direct access to it, it's stored in the unconscious as the transformation of the soul. And so this is where this gets into here. By the way, another thing I want to throw out there, tell me in the comments, because remember, huge part of my channel is about understanding things rationally and logically. So this is a complex topic, but I'm doing my best to show how it can be understood in a rational and logical way. But if any time it becomes unclear, you're like, wait, hold on, wait a minute. We're talking about angels now, or what? I know I explained them, but if something comes up where you don't quite get it, let me know so that I can explain it better and show how it relates in a rational way, how it can be understood rationally and logically. Because that's very important. And then I want to stress this. This is why I say magic is dangerous. It's very important to be rationally and logically grounded, because if you don't, you can start taking the symbols as being literally true. Like you don't want to actually literally believe that you can turn metal into gold. Most people don't believe that, and they realize that it's a symbol. But when it starts to get more subtle in terms of things like perhaps astrology or working with archangels or whatever you want to talk about, it's if you don't have a really strong rational foundation, you can become confused and not be able to separate illusion from reality, or what's a symbol and what's actual. Anyway, let's continue here. The seed that an initiation plants within the soul of the magician is a perpetual one that will remain intact throughout many different incarnations, growing stronger as the person rediscovers his or her psychic abilities with each new life cycle. None of this mystical knowledge is ever lost when an initiate undergoes physical death. It is recovered at the appropriate time in the next incarnation, and the process of mystical growth continues from the point where it left off. The ultimate goal of an initiate undergoing this progression, lifetime after lifetime, is total and perfect union with the divine self, which frees him or her from the karmic wheel and the need to incarnate further into a physical body. At this pinnacle of spiritual attainment, the initiate has the choice of remaining in the glory of the Godhead or returning to physical form in order to teach and help other initiates who are quote unquote less evolved. And that's in quotes. Let's be careful about how we talk about this stuff. But remember, it's about helping those who might not understand, right? We don't want to get into the mindset of, where you have to be careful sometimes in magical societies or just secret society. People start thinking that they're like, those less evolved fools can never comprehend the intelligence of, my vast and mighty mind. And then they end up treating people kind of pretty poorly. So let's be careful to remember that those of us who, do understand this stuff, we are in the role of teachers. We want to help. We want to help others understand themselves so we can create a better world. But you can see a lot of people think that it's about escaping reality. It's not really about escaping reality. It's about just like the Golden Dawn has different grades, going through different lifetimes are like going through different grades. You're going through, it's like school. You're going to different levels. And I just want to throw in there as a reminder, I just want this constant reminder that I'm not a fan of secrecy. I think this stuff needs to be taught in a very transparent way. When you're dealing with stuff that can alter your psyche, and there's a lot of people who may be in it for the wrong reasons, people who want power, people who want to manipulate, etc. Transparency, in my opinion, is really necessary. Originally, secret societies were secret because of persecution from the church and things like that, which is totally understandable. But we don't need to do that anymore. And we want to be able to make this information as available as possible to everyone who wants to learn it, and not have all this environment that could generate manipulation and coercion and abuse. And again, not to say that every society is bad. I'm sure there's some great people out there, but in general, I don't think we need that in the system of secrecy. So anyway, humanity too needs to evolve in order to confront the difficult challenges of a world which is experiencing great ecological threats, a skyrocketing population explosion, and rampant violence committed against human beings in the name of race, religion, and resources. Absolutely agree. As the primary cause of all these problems, it is humanity's obligation to evolve spiritually and wisely in order to correct them. If we as a species fail to evolve in this fashion, then we truly run the risk of extinction. And I talk about all the time how to create a new world, we necessarily need a new consciousness. A new consciousness is needed to create a new world, which is why first and foremost, our priority should be elevating our consciousness and helping others elevate their consciousness as well. That's the only way for true, lasting, sustainable change, or else we run the risk of extinction or getting into what's known as a slave framework, where very negative minds begin to structure the world into a negative hierarchical system, which benefits the few at the top at the expense of the many below, which is a very bad situation that we don't want. So we don't want extinction, nor do we want a slave framework to occur. We want to create a teleocratic planetary civilization. This is in terms of the Neogenian system, by the way. I just want to demarcate when we're talking about Golden Dawn versus the Neogenian system. So the personality, I'm continuing to read, the personality and its attendant mental archetypes are quite comfortable in the mundane world and will often put up a fight when threatened with change, intensifying their needs and desires in order to distract the initiate from the spiritual path. So basically saying your ego self, your personality, and those archetypes associated with everyday reality are comfortable there and will put up a fight when threatened with change. Like, oh, I'm too tired, or oh, I'll put it off, or oh, I want to go to this thing, or I want to watch this TV show. Put up, various barriers and distractions to from developing your connection to your self. Oh, this is a really good point. Another reason why I do like this book. One of the things that Israel Regardie, remember Israel Regardie was the author of a different book that I showed you at the beginning, that big black one. One of the things that Israel Regardie was adamant about was that the occult student should seek out a course of psychotherapy as a safeguard against inflation of the ego and other problems that might possibly crop up as a result of the increased activation of the psyche through magical training. We also hold this view, but we have found that it is not always possible for students to find a good therapist who is sympathetic to the magical arts. That is true. Ones who would probably be very sympathetic to this are Jungian psychologists. Those who are part of the Jungian school of thought would likely, because they should, if they're really good Jungians, they should be familiar with alchemy and things like that. But anyway, I think this is a great point. The psychotherapy, having a therapist, should ideally occur. Why? To guard against certain things, one of them being the inflation of the ego. And I mentioned that earlier, and this becomes a problem when you're associating yourself with God, essentially. You're associating yourself with God. You're commanding these forces or whatnot. What this is supposed to do is form a connection to your higher self and work on your development. What it can potentially do in a harmful way is end up inflating your ego, where the ego begins to think that it is God. The ego is not God. Your higher self is divine, and we are all together collectively divine. Your ego is the aspect of you that allows you to operate within consciousness. So it is the servant of your higher self. But when your ego can become inflated if it begins to think that it is God. And that's when you can get into some really nasty problems, where you have people who, even sometimes they get high up in orders where they think that they're gods and everyone else are little peons and foolish idiots that have to be led around like sheep. And that's not a good healthy attitude to have. Continues by saying, just as a surgeon cannot be expected to perform an operation without having committed to memory the rudiments of medical knowledge, so too the magician cannot expect to perform an effective ceremony without understanding the fundamentals of magic. So it's kind of like, if you don't understand the words, you're not really going to be able to read a book very well. Now, it could still have some sort of change, because these are very powerful archetypal images. So it could have change, but you're not going to really be able to do it very effectively or have very much control over it if you don't know what the heck it is that you're doing. Like I said, if you don't know the words, you can't read the book. So here's something I just want to kind of throw in here, which is a really cool visualization exercise. Because a lot of these systems, a lot of these things make use of your imagination because you're communicating with your unconscious. And so you will perhaps be visualizing certain things. Because remember, you're projecting from your unconscious, whether that's onto like a physical item, like a magical, like a chalice or a cup or a pentacle or whatever, or you're visualizing something. Like you are visualizing the image of a pentagram or an image of an archangel or something. This, of course, requires you to develop your imagination. And if you have aphantasia, of course, you would have to work on more like conjuring up emotions and things like that. But here's an interesting, I just want to throw this out here. This really cool visualization exercise that they say to do. And it's really simple. It's basically about, I'm imagining a very small lump of clay in your hand. And to take this lump of clay, it's a yellow lump of clay, and smash it like it's a hamburger patty, and then begin to roll it between your hands to make it into the shape of a ball. It says, when the image of the yellow ball of astral substance is very clear. See, whenever you're talking about astral substance, you're talking about your imagination. It's the realm of the mind. So this yellow ball that you're making here, this would be considered an astral image, an astral substance. But anyways, you make the ball, and then once you see it there, you pick it up and you put it down on the table, and then you just continue doing the same thing with a red ball, a blue ball, and a black ball, and you put all the balls in a row and visualize them strongly. And it's a really simple exercise, but it's good for cultivating the imagination. Really, making your astral images more substantive. And so I think this is why a lot of people think magic is crazy, because you're talking about, existing on the astral plane and working with alchemy and archangels. It sounds nuts, but when you realize that it's just communicating with your unconscious, it's psychology. It's highly advanced, but it's influenced. We find it, like I said, everywhere in Jungian psychology. So I'm taking a look at, all right, so here's what we're going to do, because we've explained the very basics of the outer order, the very basics of what you would learn, a very broad overview of what you would learn from joining as a neophyte and going through all the grades of the outer order. Then there, of course, comes the second order, or the inner order. And so remember how, so the inner order, there are three grades: the Adeptus Minor, the Adeptus Major, and the Adeptus Exemptus. Now remember how when one wants to join the outer order, they first start out as a neophyte, which isn't real. It's more like a probationary title. It's not even on the tree of life in terms of organization and structure. Well, there's another transitory grade that's not like a true grade even, between the outer order and the inner order, which is known as the portal. So there's another grade called the portal grade, which is essentially all about preparing one for entrance into the inner order. And the inner order, the second order, this is the order that Aleister Crowley absolutely wanted to get into to learn its secrets, and resulted in him basically revolting against the Golden Dawn, after he got initiated by Mathers and took over one of the temples. And a lot of this ended up in the fracturing and falling apart of the Golden Dawn. Anyway, this is the order that Crowley really wanted to get into, and he was obsessed with, and he eventually did through Mathers. But anyway, we talked about what the outer order is about. So what is the inner order about? The inner order, or the second order, is about going beyond human. So we talked about how the outer order is with the 4 elements. Well, guess what? There's a 5th element. The 5th element is spirit. So beginning with the portal grade into the inner order, you begin working with spirit, and you begin working with going beyond human into the inner order. And I'll explain what that means. But then, of course, after the the second order, the inner order, there's the 3rd order, which was the realms of the secret chiefs. And like I said, we could talk about that more because there's some interesting things to discuss there. Like I said, I think that there was a ton of manipulation going on there. But there's some interesting things related to that. And it has to do with, we talked a lot about inner transformation, right? But what do you usually hear about secret societies? You usually hear also about like directing the world, like the world as a whole. Usually that's often associated with secret societies. Well, this is where we would start to discuss certain things in the 3rd order, which I will if you guys want to hear about that. But first, we would talk about the 2nd order. The 2nd order is about going beyond human and related to the element of spirit, the 5th element. So what I want to know from you guys is, because we've been talking for a while, is when we do another video, I want to know, what do you guys want to do? You want to go into what the inner order is, the 2nd order, or do you want to spend more time unpacking one of the systems here, such as like Kabbalah or alchemy or the Tree of Life, or maybe one of the rituals, lesser banishing ritual, the pentagram, whatever. Tell me what you want. Tell me what you want to hear about. I would think that perhaps we would go to the inner order next, talk about the 2nd order, and then maybe we could go back and do a closer look at some of these things after we have like a bird's eye view of what this is all about. If that is indeed what you want to do, let me know. Tell me in the comments. So I think we're going to wrap up here because, like I said, we've been going for a long time. And like I said, this is a massive amount of information that's hard to hard to put into words. So let me know what needs to be made more clear, and let me know if you enjoyed this as well. I always want to know, because talking about magic and this sort of stuff is new, it's fairly new on my channel. So let me know if you want more of this, if you want to continue this, or if you're more interested in other things. I would like to know. I always pay attention to your comments. One reason why I even did this video is because a ton of you were saying how much you wanted to know about this topic. So as always, you can check out the links in the description of this video, where you can find my books, which is Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. Start with this one. And you can find links to the various Golden Dawn books that we referenced today as well. And if you enjoy my work, consider becoming a member. Become a member on Patreon by hitting the join button below this video. Get access to members only videos, a bunch of cool stuff. And I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports. I appreciate it very much, especially Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, DB, Nucelina, Christopher Smith, Dallas, Digital Tech, Seaweed, David King, and everyone else. Thank you very much.